I'm still shaking as I write this, and it's been 3 days since it happened. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to get this out somewhere because I can't sleep, and I keep replaying every single detail in my head. I've been driving long haul for about 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything on these roads. I mean, you encounter all sorts of weird stuff when you're driving cross-country at all hours, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what went down last Tuesday night in the middle of the California desert. I was hauling a load of furniture from Phoenix to Los Angeles, taking the usual route through the desert on I-10. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was making good time, planning to grab some coffee at the next truck stop and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before hitting the LA traffic in the morning. The desert at night is something else. Pitch black except for your headlights, and the silence is so thick you can almost hear your own heartbeat over the engine noise. I'd driven this stretch hundreds of times before, so I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. That's when I saw the hazard lights blinking up ahead on the right shoulder. At first I figured it was just another breakdown. Happens all the time out here where cell service is spotty and the nearest tow truck might be hours away. As I got closer, I could make out what looked like a newer Honda Civic, dark-colored, sitting right next to this old abandoned gas station that's been empty for as long as I can remember. The place used to be a Shell station, but it's been boarded up for years, with graffiti covering most of the walls and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. I've passed it countless times and never given it a second thought. But something about seeing that car there with its hazards blinking in the darkness made me slow down. I'm not usually the type to stop for every stranded motorist. You learn to be careful in this business. But the car looked new and expensive, not like the usual junkers you see broken down out here. Plus, being a father myself, I always think about how I'd want someone to help my daughter if she was ever stuck alone in the middle of nowhere like this. I pulled my rig over about 50 yards past the car and put on my own hazards. The whole area was lit up by my headlights, and I could see the Honda more clearly now. It was a dark blue or black Civic, maybe 2019 or 2020, with temporary plates. The driver's door was slightly open, which struck me as odd because most people would keep their doors locked if they were waiting for help in a place like this. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and walked back toward the car, calling out, "Hey, you need some help?" As I approached. No answer. When I got to the driver's side, I could see the interior light was on, but there was nobody inside. The keys were still in the ignition, and I noticed the person had left their wallet on the passenger seat, a brown leather one that looked expensive. That's when I started getting that weird feeling in my gut, like something wasn't right about this whole situation. I looked around for whoever owned the car, thinking maybe they'd walked over to the abandoned gas station to try to get cell service or use a payphone, if there even was one still working over there. The place looked even creepier up close than it did from the highway. Broken windows, a door hanging off its hinges, and that musty smell you get from buildings that have been empty too long. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello? Anyone there? I'm a trucker. I can help you out." My voice seemed to get swallowed up by the desert silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of my diesel engine idling and the occasional tick-tick-tick of the Honda's hazard lights. I walked closer to the abandoned station, shining my flashlight toward the entrance. The front door was propped open with what looked like a cinder block, and I could see broken glass scattered on the ground near the entrance. I've lived in rural areas most of my life, so I'm not easily spooked. But there was something about the way the darkness seemed to pool around that building that made the hair on my arms stand up. I figured maybe whoever owned the Honda had gone inside looking for help or trying to find a working phone, and maybe they'd gotten hurt on all that broken glass. That's the only reason I decided to go check. I was genuinely worried someone might be injured and need medical attention. Looking back now, I should have just called 911 right then and there, but hindsight is 20/20, right? I stepped through the doorway, sweeping my flashlight beam around the interior. The place was trashed, old shelves knocked over, debris everywhere, and that thick layer of dust that accumulates when a place has been abandoned for years. But what caught my attention immediately was that some of the dust on the floor looked disturbed, like someone had been walking around in there recently. There were footprints, at least 2 different sets, maybe 3, leading from the entrance toward what used to be the back office area. I followed them slowly, my boots crunching on broken glass and old cigarette butts. The smell hit me about halfway across the main floor. Not just the usual musty abandonment smell, but something else. Something metallic and sharp that made my stomach turn. I've helped at a few accident scenes over the years, so I recognized it immediately. It was the smell of fresh blood. My heart started pounding, and I almost turned around right then. But I kept thinking that maybe someone was hurt and needed help. Maybe they'd cut themselves on the broken glass and were bleeding somewhere in the back. That's when I heard it, a sound that made every muscle in my body tense up. It was breathing, but not normal breathing. It was heavy, labored, like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling with pain or fear. The sound was coming from the back office area behind what used to be the customer service counter. I froze in place, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as my hands started to tremble. I whispered, "Hey, are you okay back there? I'm here to help." The breathing stopped completely. Dead silence for maybe 10 seconds that felt like an hour. Then I heard something that still gives me chills when I think about it. A voice barely above a whisper saying, "Get out. Get out now." It wasn't a threat directed at me, though. It sounded more like a warning, like someone was trying to help me. The voice was strained, like the person was in pain or terrified. I took a step closer, and that's when my flashlight beam hit the floor near the counter. There was a pool of blood, dark and thick, still wet enough to reflect my light. It wasn't just a few drops from a minor cut. This was serious, fresh blood, maybe a pint or more. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight steady. I knew I needed to call 911 immediately, but part of me was still thinking someone back there needed immediate help. I took another step forward and called out softly, "I'm calling for help, okay? Just hang on." That's when I heard movement, not footsteps exactly, but like someone or something shifting position. Then came another whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. "He's still here." Those 3 words hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever was back there wasn't alone, and they were trying to warn me that someone dangerous was still in the building. My survival instincts finally kicked in, and I started backing toward the entrance, trying to keep my flashlight pointed toward the back while also watching for any movement around me. Every shadow seemed to be moving. Every small sound made me jump. I fumbled for my phone with my free hand, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The screen lit up and I saw I had 1 bar of signal. Barely enough, but it would have to do. I made it back outside and immediately hit 911, walking quickly toward my truck while keeping my eyes on the gas station entrance. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. "This is going to sound crazy, but I think I stumbled onto a crime scene," I told her, giving her the mile marker and describing what I'd found. She asked if I could see any injured persons, and I explained about the voices and the blood. While I was talking, I kept glancing back at the Honda Civic, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The driver's door, which had been slightly open when I first approached, was now completely closed. I know for a fact it had been cracked open earlier because I'd specifically noticed it. I stopped walking and stared at the car, phone still pressed to my ear. The dispatcher was asking me something, but I wasn't really listening anymore because I was watching the Honda's interior light. It had been on when I first looked inside, but now it was off. Someone had been in that car while I was inside the gas station. I told the dispatcher to hold on and started walking back toward the Honda, my flashlight beam focused on the car. "Sir, I need you to stay on the line and keep a safe distance," she was saying, but I had to know what was going on. As I got closer, I could see that the wallet that had been on the passenger seat was gone. The keys were still in the ignition, but now they were turned to the on position. I could see the dashboard lights glowing faintly. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I backed away from the car and got back on the phone, telling the dispatcher about the changes I'd observed. She was asking me to describe the vehicle in detail and wanted to know if I could see the license plate number. I started walking around to the back of the Honda, keeping my distance but trying to get a clear view of the temporary tag. That's when I heard the engine start up. Not a normal startup either. It caught immediately, like someone had just turned the key, not like a car that had been sitting dead on the side of the road. The headlights came on, blinding me for a second, and I stumbled backward toward my truck. Through the phone, I could hear the dispatcher asking what was happening, her voice getting more urgent. The Honda started moving, pulling away from the shoulder and onto the highway. I watched in complete disbelief as it accelerated and disappeared into the darkness, heading west toward Los Angeles. I stood there like an idiot, staring at the empty space where the car had been, trying to process what had just happened. The dispatcher was practically shouting at me now, asking if I was safe and if the vehicle was gone. I managed to stammer out that yes, the car had just driven away, and no, I hadn't seen who was driving it. She told me to stay exactly where I was and that units were being dispatched to my location. I walked back to my truck and sat in the cab with the doors locked, engine running, ready to get out of there fast if I needed to. The whole thing felt like a nightmare, but the adrenaline coursing through my body and the taste of fear in my mouth told me it was all too real. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I kept my truck running and my eyes glued to both mirrors, expecting to see headlights coming back toward me at any moment. Every few minutes, the dispatcher would check in, asking if I was still safe and if I'd seen any other vehicles. I told her about the voices I'd heard inside the gas station, about the warning to get out, and about someone saying, "He's still here." She asked me to repeat everything multiple times, and I could tell she was typing furiously on her end. When I described the fresh blood on the floor, her tone got even more serious. She told me that deputies were about 15 minutes out and that I should not, under any circumstances, go back into that building. Trust me, I had no intention of doing that. I sat there chain-smoking cigarettes, something I rarely do anymore, and trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The whole sequence of events kept playing over and over in my head. Someone had been in that Honda while I was inside the gas station. They'd moved the wallet, closed the door, and turned on the car. But who had been whispering those warnings from the back office? And whose blood was that on the floor? The first sheriff's deputy arrived exactly 17 minutes after my initial call, followed by 2 more patrol cars and an ambulance. I watched their headlights cut through the darkness as they pulled up, and I've never been so relieved to see law enforcement in my life. The lead deputy was a middle-aged guy with a thick mustache who introduced himself as Sergeant Martinez. He had me go through the entire story again, while his partner took notes. When I got to the part about the voices in the gas station, I saw them exchange glances. Martinez asked me to be very specific about what I'd heard, the exact words, the tone of voice, whether it sounded like one person or multiple people. I told them about the labored breathing, the whispered "get out," and the warning that "he's still here." They had me describe the blood pool in detail, its location, approximate size, and how fresh it appeared. Martinez told me they'd need to process the scene and that I might be there for a while longer. 2 deputies went into the gas station with high-powered flashlights while the others secured the perimeter. I could see their lights moving around inside, and after about 10 minutes, one of them came back out and called Martinez over for a private conversation. Martinez came back to my truck with a grim expression on his face. He told me they'd found the blood I'd described, along with what appeared to be drag marks leading from the back office area toward a rear exit I hadn't even known existed. There were also signs of a struggle, overturned furniture that looked recently disturbed, not just old abandonment damage. He asked me again about the timing of everything, wanting to know exactly how long I'd been inside the building and how long I'd been on the phone before the Honda drove away. When I told him it was probably 15 to 20 minutes total, he nodded like that confirmed something he was thinking. He also asked if I'd gotten a good look at the temporary license plate, but I had to admit I'd been too focused on other things to pay attention to the numbers. The deputy taking notes asked about the wallet I'd seen, what it looked like, where exactly it had been positioned, and whether I'd seen any identification or credit cards visible. I described the brown leather wallet as best I could, mentioning that it looked expensive and new. Martinez told me they were treating this as a possible kidnapping and assault case, and that my testimony might be crucial if they found the people involved. After about an hour, they let me move my truck closer to where they were working so I could stay warm while they finished processing the scene. I watched them take photographs, collect evidence, and examine every inch of that abandoned gas station. A crime scene technician showed up around 4 a.m. with more equipment, and they started doing things with luminol that made certain areas glow under black light, including spots I hadn't even noticed with my regular flashlight. Around 5:30, as the sky was just starting to lighten up in the east, Martinez came over with a business card and told me I was free to go. He said a detective would probably want to interview me again in the next few days, and that I should call immediately if I remembered any additional details or if anything unusual happened. I asked him what he thought had really gone down there, but he just shook his head and said they were still investigating. Before I left, I asked if they'd found any trace of the people who'd been in the back office. Martinez looked tired and frustrated when he told me they'd found evidence that someone had been injured there recently, but no sign of where they'd gone or who they were. I got back on the road around 6 a.m., but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car that passed me seemed suspicious, and I kept checking my mirrors for that dark Honda Civic. The rest of the drive to Los Angeles was a blur. I was running on pure adrenaline and coffee, jumping at every sound. When I finally reached the delivery destination, I was 3 hours behind schedule and probably looked like hell. The warehouse guys kept asking if I was okay because my hands were still shaking when I signed the paperwork. I didn't tell them what had happened. Honestly, I wasn't sure they'd believe me anyway. The whole thing sounded crazy even to me, and I'd lived through it. I kept thinking about those voices in the dark, especially the person who'd warned me to get out. Were they trying to save me from walking into something worse? Or were they part of whatever sick game was being played out there? And who was he? The person who was supposedly still in the building. I never saw anyone else, never heard footsteps or any indication that there was another person hiding in those shadows. The detective called me 2 days later while I was back home in Phoenix. Detective Williams was her name, and she had a lot more questions than the deputies at the scene. She wanted to know about my route that night, whether I'd stopped anywhere else, if I'd noticed any vehicles following me before I reached the gas station. She also asked about my phone records and whether I'd taken any pictures, which I hadn't. I was too freaked out to think about documenting anything. Williams told me they'd found DNA evidence at the scene, but wouldn't say whose or what kind. She also mentioned that they'd checked traffic cameras along that stretch of I-10, but the Honda Civic never showed up on any of them after leaving the gas station. It was like the car just vanished into thin air once it hit the highway. When I asked about the people who'd been injured in the building, she got quiet for a moment before saying they were pursuing several leads, but couldn't share specifics. The way she said it made me think they still hadn't found whoever had been bleeding on that floor. 3 weeks have passed since that night, and I still haven't gotten any answers. Detective Williams called me once more about 10 days ago, asking if I'd remembered anything else or if anyone had contacted me about the incident. When I told her no, she sounded disappointed but not surprised. She did mention that they'd identified the owner of the Honda Civic. Apparently, it had been reported stolen from a parking garage in Las Vegas 2 days before I found it. The owner was a 28-year-old woman who'd been visiting Vegas for a conference and had no connection to anything that happened at the gas station. So whoever was using that car had stolen it and driven it out to the middle of the desert for reasons nobody could figure out. Williams also told me they'd found fingerprints inside the abandoned building that didn't match anyone in the system, which meant whoever was involved didn't have a criminal record, at least not one that showed up in their databases. The blood they'd found belonged to someone with type O negative blood, but without a suspect to compare it to, that information wasn't much help. I've driven that same route 4 times since then for different deliveries, and I always slow down when I pass that abandoned gas station. It looks exactly the same as it did before, boarded up, covered in graffiti, weeds growing through the concrete, but I can't look at it the same way anymore. Every time I see those broken windows and that hanging door, I think about the voices in the darkness and wonder what really happened there. Were those people killed? Did they escape? Was the whole thing some kind of setup that I accidentally stumbled into? The not knowing is what gets to me the most. I've talked to other truckers about it, and a few of them have mentioned seeing strange things at that same location over the years. Cars parked there at odd hours, people hanging around who didn't look like they belonged. One driver told me he'd seen lights moving around inside the building late at night, even though the place has been without power for years. Another guy said he'd stopped there once during the day and found fresh tire tracks in the dirt behind the building, like someone had been using the back area recently. The worst part is how it's affected my sleep. I used to be able to pull over anywhere and catch a few hours of rest without thinking twice about it. Now I find myself choosing only well-lit truck stops with plenty of other drivers around, even if it means going miles out of my way. Every time I see a car with hazard lights on the side of the road, my heart starts racing and I have to fight the urge to just keep driving. I know that makes me sound like a coward, but after what I experienced that night, I can't bring myself to stop for stranded motorists anymore. What if it's another setup? What if someone is using that same trick to lure people into dangerous situations? I've tried talking to my wife about it, but she just tells me I did the right thing by calling the police and that I need to let it go. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one who heard those terrified whispers in the dark or saw that fresh blood on the floor. She wasn't the one who watched a supposedly abandoned car drive itself away into the night. I've been doing some research online, trying to find similar incidents or news reports about what happened that night. I've searched for missing persons cases in the California desert, unsolved crimes along I-10, anything that might give me some answers, but I haven't found anything that matches what I witnessed. It's like it never happened, except for the business card Detective Williams gave me and the memories that won't leave me alone. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the isolation and fatigue of long-haul driving finally got to me and made me hallucinate the entire experience. But then I remember how real everything felt. The metallic smell of blood, the sound of labored breathing, the way my hands shook when I called 911. You can't fake that kind of physical reaction to fear. Something terrible happened at that gas station, and I was lucky enough to walk away from it. But I can't stop thinking about the people who didn't walk away, the ones whose blood I found on that dusty floor. What bothers me most is that I keep having the same dream about 3 times a week. I'm back at the gas station, but this time when I hear the voices in the back office, I actually go to help instead of running away. In the dream, I find 2 people tied up behind the counter, a young woman and an older man, both badly beaten. They're trying to warn me about someone else in the building, someone who's been watching me since I pulled over. The woman keeps whispering, "He's coming back," over and over, and I can hear footsteps approaching from somewhere deeper in the building. I always wake up right before I see who it is, my sheets soaked in sweat and my heart pounding like I've been running for miles. The dream feels so real that sometimes I have to check the news to make sure I didn't actually go back and find those people. I know it sounds crazy, but part of me feels guilty for not doing more that night. Maybe if I'd been braver, if I'd actually gone to help whoever was back there, things would have turned out differently. Last week I was talking to another trucker at a rest stop in Arizona, and when I mentioned the incident, his face went white. He told me that about 6 months ago, he'd been driving through that same area and had seen something strange at that exact gas station. Around midnight, he'd noticed several cars parked behind the building with their engines running but no lights on. He said it looked like some kind of meeting or transaction was taking place, but something about the scene made him nervous enough to keep driving without stopping. When he passed by again on his return trip 2 days later, there were police cars and crime scene tape around the area, but he never found out what they were investigating. He gave me the chills when he said he'd always wondered if he should have called it in that first night. Now I'm wondering if that gas station has been used for criminal activity for longer than anyone realizes, and if I just happened to stumble into something that had been going on for months. I've started carrying a baseball bat in my cab now, something I never felt the need to do in 12 years of driving. My wife thinks I'm being paranoid, but she wasn't there that night. She didn't hear the desperation in that person's voice when they warned me to get out. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night through remote areas, I catch myself checking the CB radio more often, listening for other truckers who might be nearby in case I need backup. It's changed how I see this job, how I see the roads I've traveled thousands of times before. Every abandoned building, every dark rest area, every car parked on the shoulder could be hiding something sinister. The desert that used to feel peaceful and empty now feels threatening, like it's full of secrets that normal people aren't supposed to discover. I've talked to a few other drivers about increasing security measures, maybe organizing informal buddy systems for overnight routes through isolated areas. Most of them think I'm overreacting, but a couple have admitted they've had their own strange encounters over the years that they never reported. The thing that really gets to me is how quickly everything returned to normal for everyone else. The police finished their investigation, Detective Williams stopped calling, and life went on like nothing had happened. But for me, that night changed everything. I can't drive past that stretch of highway without feeling sick to my stomach. I can't see hazard lights blinking in the distance without my hands starting to shake. And I can't stop wondering about the people whose blood I found on that floor, where they are now, whether they survived, whether they're still being held somewhere by whoever was controlling that situation. The not knowing is eating me alive. It's been over 3 weeks, and I still jump every time my phone rings, hoping it might be Detective Williams with news about the case. But deep down, I'm starting to think I'll never get answers about what really happened that night in the desert. The strangest part is that I've become obsessed with checking missing persons reports from Nevada, California, and Arizona. Every few days, I'll spend hours scrolling through websites and social media posts about people who've disappeared along major highways in the Southwest. I'm looking for faces that might match the voices I heard that night, hoping to find some connection that might help the police solve the case. So far, I haven't found anything concrete, but there are definitely people who've gone missing in that general area over the past few months. A college student from UNLV who was driving home to Los Angeles and never arrived. A businessman from Phoenix who was supposed to meet clients in Barstow but never showed up. A woman from Riverside who was visiting friends in Flagstaff and disappeared somewhere along I-40. Maybe none of these cases are connected to what I witnessed, but the timing and locations make me wonder if there's a pattern that law enforcement hasn't recognized yet. What scares me most is the possibility that this wasn't a random crime, but part of something bigger and more organized. The way that Honda appeared and disappeared so perfectly, The fact that whoever was in control of the situation knew exactly when to make their move. It all felt too calculated to be the work of opportunistic criminals. Someone had planned this whole scenario, maybe even used that abandoned gas station as a regular location for whatever they were doing. I keep thinking about what the other trucker told me about seeing multiple cars there months earlier, and it makes me wonder how many people have driven past that place without stopping to investigate. How many potential victims or witnesses just kept going because they minded their own business? And how many people like me have stopped to help and never made it home to tell the story? The thought that I might have been intended as another victim, that stopping there put me in danger I didn't even realize, keeps me awake at night. I've tried reaching out to Detective Williams twice in the past week, but she hasn't returned my calls. Part of me wonders if they've closed the case due to lack of evidence, or if they've been told to stop investigating for reasons I can't understand. The last time we spoke, she seemed frustrated and mentioned something about jurisdictional complications that didn't make much sense to me at the time. Now I'm starting to think maybe this case involves more agencies than just the local sheriff's department. Maybe whoever was operating out of that gas station had connections or resources that made them difficult to track down. I've heard stories from other truckers about organized crime groups that target remote locations along major shipping routes, using them for everything from drug trafficking to human smuggling. The thought that I might have stumbled into something that big and dangerous makes my blood run cold. If that's what was really going on, then it's no wonder the investigation seems to have stalled. Yesterday, I made a decision that my wife thinks is crazy, but I can't shake the feeling that I need to do something more. I'm planning to drive back through that area next week during daylight hours this time and take a closer look at the gas station. I want to see if there are any signs of recent activity, any clues that the police might have missed or that have appeared since they finished processing the scene. I know it's probably dangerous and definitely stupid, but I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. I need to know if that place is still being used, if there are other people out there who might be in danger. My wife begged me not to go, reminded me that I have a family to think about, and that whatever happened that night isn't my responsibility. But I keep hearing those whispered warnings in my head, and I can't help feeling like I failed someone who was counting on me for help. Maybe if I go back, I'll find some kind of closure, or at least evidence that might help the authorities figure out what really happened. I drove back to that gas station 3 days ago, and I wish I hadn't. I went during the afternoon this time, thinking daylight would make everything seem less threatening and more manageable. The place looked exactly the same from the highway. Same broken windows, same graffiti, same weeds growing through the pavement. But when I walked around to the back of the building, I found things that made my stomach drop. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, definitely newer than the ones from my night there over a month ago. Someone had been using that location recently, probably within the past week based on how clear the tread patterns were in the dust. I also found cigarette butts that weren't weathered or faded like you'd expect from something that had been sitting outside for weeks. These looked fresh, maybe a few days old at most. But the thing that really shook me up was finding a small piece of torn fabric caught on a piece of broken metal near the back door. It was blue denim, and there was what looked like a dark stain on it that I didn't want to think too hard about. I called Detective Williams from the parking lot, but got her voicemail again. This time I left a detailed message about what I'd found, including the exact location of the tire tracks and fabric. I took pictures with my phone and told her I'd email them to her as soon as I got somewhere with better signal. But as I was getting ready to leave, I noticed something that made me realize I wasn't alone out there. There was a dark pickup truck parked about a quarter-mile away on a side road that ran parallel to the highway. I hadn't seen it when I first arrived, but now it was clearly visible, and I could make out someone sitting in the driver's seat with what looked like binoculars. The truck was too far away for me to see the license plate or get a good look at the person inside, but they were definitely watching me. I got back in my rig as casually as I could and pulled away, but I kept checking my mirrors for the next 50 miles. The pickup never followed me onto the highway, but I had the distinct feeling that whoever was in it had been keeping tabs on that gas station, maybe waiting to see if anyone would come back. I've been looking over my shoulder constantly since that afternoon at the gas station. Every time I'm at a truck stop or rest area, I find myself scanning the parking lot for that dark pickup truck, wondering if whoever was watching me that day is still keeping track of my movements. I've started varying my routes and schedules, something I never had to worry about in all my years of driving. My dispatcher has been asking questions about why I'm requesting different loads and avoiding certain highways, but I can't exactly tell him I'm afraid of being followed by people who might be involved in kidnapping or worse. The whole situation has me questioning whether I should even be on the road anymore, whether continuing to drive through remote areas is putting my family at risk. My wife has been after me for years to find a local driving job, something that would keep me home every night, and for the first time I'm seriously considering it.